just a matter of time. And we got nothing to...
She stopped the take halfway through the line. Not because the note was wrong, not because the room sounded off. She stopped because something didn't feel safe yet. No one spoke. The musicians stayed still, and across the glass, the man who had written the song waited without interrupting. That moment would never be replayed publicly, but it lingered longer than the music itself. If you care about the real stories behind the legends, the moments they never explain, subscribe to RetroWaves. The silence in that studio wasn't accidental. It was learned. By then, she had spent a lifetime being misunderstood for her strength. People called it control. Others called it difficulty. What few understood was that it came from memory. Memories of having her voice shaped, trimmed, softened, and redirected long before she was ready to give it away. So when she walked into that room, she didn't walk in as a collaborator. She walked in as someone guarding something fragile. He knew that, or at least he sensed it. He had written the melody carefully, leaving space where most writers would fill it. The structure was there, but the emotional center was deliberately unfinished. Not because he didn't know how it should feel, but because he wanted her to decide that herself. Still, she hesitated. She had worked with brilliant men before, men who promised restraint, men who praised her instincts until they didn't. And she had learned that trust in the studio rarely announced itself. It revealed its absence quietly. She listened to the playback again. The phrasing was right, the pitch was perfect, but something in her body resisted moving forward. What she didn't say, what she would never say out loud in that moment, was that she feared becoming a guest in her own voice, that once the door opened, it wouldn't be hers to close. And he waited. That alone unsettled her. He was known for intensity, for emotional insistence, for pushing singers into places they hadn't planned to visit. There were stories, always whispered, never confirmed, about how he could dismantle a vocal performance and rebuild it into something devastating. She had heard them. She had also heard the records, songs that didn't just sound sung, but surrendered. That was the danger, because surrender once offered can't be rehearsed. She asked to take it again. This time, she changed nothing obvious. Same tempo, same breath, same line. But afterward, she looked through the glass, not to the producer's chair, not to the engineer, but to him. He didn't nod, didn't correct, didn't suggest. He simply said, "If it doesn't feel like yours yet, we don't move on." That wasn't the answer she expected, and it didn't resolve anything, because for her, the fear wasn't about the song. It was about what would happen if it worked. She had spent years building a reputation for exactness, for knowing precisely when to hold back emotion and when to let it spill. It was part instinct, part defense. Once you let someone else decide that balance, you never quite get it back. And he came from a different place. He believed emotion was discovered, not protected, that if you didn't risk losing control, the song stayed unfinished, no matter how technically perfect it sounded. Neither of them said this out loud. They didn't need to. The tension lived in the space between takes, between what was being recorded and what wasn't. She asked to hear the demo again, the version he had recorded alone. His voice was thinner than hers, more vulnerable. It carried uncertainty openly, without apology. She noticed something then. He hadn't sung it as a guide. He had sung it as a confession. That complicated things. Because now the question wasn't whether he would take something from her. It was whether he had already given something first. Still, she didn't move forward. She took a break, stepped outside the room, let the silence reset her pulse. She had walked away from collaborations before, quietly, politely, without explanation, and she could do it again if she needed to. What held her there wasn't confidence, it was curiosity. Why hadn't he tried to steer her yet? Why hadn't he reshaped the melody to fit his own instincts? And why did that make her more uneasy than resistance ever had? When she returned, the lights felt dimmer, or maybe her eyes had adjusted. The band was ready, but no one rushed her. She stood at the microphone and adjusted it herself, lower than usual. That wasn't a technical choice, it was a test. She sang again, softer this time, not weaker, just less armored. No one stopped her, no one corrected her, and still, she wasn't ready to trust what was happening, because something important was forming beneath the surface, and once it crossed a certain point, there would be no going back. She finished the take and stayed perfectly still, not waiting for feedback, waiting for proof. The playback rolled quietly through the room. She listened without closing her eyes this time. There were no obvious flaws, no missed notes, no moments that demanded correction, but the performance felt exposed in a way she wasn't used to hearing from herself. not theatrical, not polished, something closer to unguarded. She didn't comment on it. Instead, she asked a different question. Do you want it stronger? It was a familiar offer, one she'd made countless times before. Stronger meant safer. Stronger meant control. Stronger meant returning to the version of herself everyone already trusted. He didn't answer immediately. That pause, small, almost invisible, did more than any critique ever could. I want it honest, he said finally. Whatever that sounds like to you. That wasn't reassurance. That was responsibility. She turned away from the glass and looked down at the lyric sheet. Though she already knew every word, she traced a line with her finger, stopping halfway through a sentence that never quite resolved emotionally. She hadn't written these words, but she recognized the feeling behind them. That unsettled her, because recognition is harder to resist than instruction. They ran the song again. This time she changed the phrasing, not to improve it, but to protect herself. She elongated certain syllables, added familiar emphasis, shaped the melody the way she always had. It sounded beautiful. It also sounded distant. No one said anything when it ended. The engineer waited. The band stayed silent. And again, he didn't rush in. That restraint was beginning to feel intentional. She broke the silence herself. That version works, she said. Not confidently, just definitively. He nodded, but there was something careful in his expression. Not disagreement, not approval, something unresolved. That's not the one, he said gently. But we can come back to it. The words were calm, respectful, but they landed heavily, because she knew what he meant. It worked, but it didn't stay. And she had built an entire career on performances that stayed. She stepped out of the booth again, this time without announcing it. The hallway was empty, the kind of quiet that hums rather than rests. She leaned against the wall and waited for her breathing to slow. She wasn't angry. She was afraid, not of him, of the possibility that he was right, that somewhere beneath the control, beneath the precision, there was another version of her voice that hadn't been asked for in a long time. And once invited out, it wouldn't retreat quietly. When she returned, she didn't apologize. She adjusted the microphone again, lower still, almost uncomfortable. He noticed. Everyone did. No one commented. They started the track. This time, she didn't think about projection, or phrasing, or how it would sound on record. She thought about something else entirely, something she had never connected to this song before. Her voice wavered slightly on the second line, not enough to call it a mistake, enough to feel it. Her instinct screamed to correct it. She didn't. That decision, that single refusal to fix what could be fixed, changed the air in the room. He leaned forward in his chair, not to interrupt, to listen closer. She reached the chorus and felt the moment approaching, the place where singers usually lean in, where emotion becomes visible. She pulled back instead. And then, unexpectedly, her voice softened, not weakened, opened. The take ended without anyone moving. No one reached for the talkback button. She stayed at the microphone, eyes open, waiting, not for praise, for confirmation that she hadn't gone too far. Finally, his voice came through the speakers. "Can we try that again?" he said, "but don't hold back this time." There it was, the request she had been circling all day. Not a command, an invitation. And suddenly, she understood why this collaboration had felt different from the beginning. He wasn't asking her to give up control. He was asking her to decide when to release it. That choice weighed heavier than any instruction ever had. She took a breath, a real one, not the kind meant for singing, the kind meant for truth. The next take began differently. She didn't shape the first line. She let it arrive. The vulnerability startled her. It startled everyone, including him. And for the first time since she'd walked into that room, she felt something shift. Not resolve, not comfort, but recognition. Not between artist and producer, between two people who understood what it cost to let a song take something from you. The track ended. This time, she couldn't bring herself to look through the glass, because she knew what had just happened. And she wasn't sure she was ready to name it yet. She didn't speak when the room came back to life. Not because she didn't know what to say, because she knew that saying anything too soon would shrink what had just happened. The engineer finally broke the silence, asking if they wanted to listen back. She nodded once, still standing at the microphone, as if leaving it might undo something. The playback began. Her voice sounded different now. Not younger, not freer, just unhidden. There were tiny imperfections she would have corrected in any other session. Slight hesitations, a breath taken sooner than planned, a line that leaned into emotion before the melody fully caught up. She noticed all of it, and for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to fix any of it. Across the glass, he didn't watch the console, he watched her. Not with expectation, with care. When the song ended, he didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch until it became part of the room again. "That's the one," he said finally. She didn't respond. She needed a moment to understand why that sentence didn't scare her. Because earlier, it would have. Earlier, it would have meant the door was closing, that the version was decided, that whatever had been offered was now permanent. But this felt different. This felt like something she had chosen to leave behind. She sat down, finally. The physical release surprised her. Her shoulders dropped, and only then did she realize how tense she'd been since the first note of the day. "I don't usually sing like that," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. That was it. No praise, no analysis, no attempt to frame it as bravery or risk, just acknowledgement. Later, much later, she would explain it in interviews with careful language. She would say it was a collaboration built on mutual respect, that the sessions were calm, that the process felt natural. All of that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The part she didn't say was that she had been protecting something for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone hear it without defense. Not her voice, herself, and he hadn't forced it out of her. He had waited. That waiting was the key. Because she had spent a career being told when to give, when to peek, when to reveal. This was the first time someone trusted her enough to let her decide. Trust, she realized, wasn't about control being taken away. It was about control no longer being needed. They recorded another take that day, then another, not because they had to, but because she wanted to stay in that space a little longer. Each performance carried the same quiet openness, the same sense of something resting rather than reaching. When the session finally ended, she lingered near the door. She turned back to him. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, understanding more than the words offered. Years later, listeners would hear the song and talk about its intimacy, about how close it felt, how personal, how different it sounded from anything she'd done before. What they wouldn't know was that the closeness wasn't created in the lyrics. It was created in the waiting, in the patience, in the silence, in the choice not to push. She had hesitated to trust him, not because she doubted his talent, but because she knew exactly what it cost to let someone see past the armor. That day she decided the cost was worth it. And once she did, the song stopped asking for permission. It simply existed, quietly, truthfully, and entirely her own.